Hello, everyone, and welcome in. Happy Thursday evening. It is May 15th, 2025, which means I feel like I saw the graphic at some point today. What are we, 100 days, 99 days away from kickoff for Georgia Tech? But we have a lot to talk about, a lot to cover as college football season will be here before you know it. ACC Media Days will be here before you know it. There's a lot of content to talk about, and we want to let you know that you should make this the number one place that you're going to be listening to everything Georgia Tech, everything college football. It's all college football all the time here on the Crowded Booth. My name is Bryce Coon. Make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel as well as we get ready to talk a little bit about the kind of the narrative around Georgia Tech, a little bit of a state of a program take about where this program is entering 2025. And I think it's important to preface all of this with this isn't a prediction show. This isn't we're going through the schedule and we're going to tell you X, Y, and Z of where this thing goes. This is not what that is. This is more of my thoughts on where the program is currently from a roster construction standpoint, from a schedule standpoint of what they could face this year. It's obviously way too early to be judging teams and what they're going to be, but you can hypothesize based off of the stuff you're hearing or reading about the teams coming out of spring ball. And the last thing is just the coaching staff and the development there as well. So there's kind of the three phases that we're going to talk about, but I did want to talk kind of briefly about where this program is and where this program can go. You know, we sat here, 2 years ago, and we talked with you about what this team has the potential to be and what it should be. And there was a lot of people, and we had obviously, a lot of people commenting and a lot of people talking about certain things about where this could take off and what needed to happen. And I think kind of the baseline of the conversation has to start with, regardless if you have been happy with what, some of the individual results, the week in to week out stuff, we can sit there and we can split hairs on some of those things. But I think when we talk about where the state of the program is with this, you have to be real with yourself and say, and this is the word I would use, it has been stabilized. The program has been stabilized to the point of where you're on solid footing, you have a solid foundation as a program, and 2025 can, I don't want to say make or break, but it could be the launching pad to something special. Or it could continue to be the plateau of what you are. Or worst case scenario, it could be disaster and you could regress. But you have to feel like now there's no longer the excuse of what the previous regime did. There's no longer the excuse of my players aren't there or those players are the personnel or the scheme group. No, this coming into 2025, yes, you lost some good talent in the portal. Yes, you have some question marks of can those guys, numerically replace what you lost. Those are always going to be questions for every single team entering the 2025 season. But in terms of what you return from a core standpoint, there really isn't any excuses for this year. Now, look, we can talk about the talent gap between Georgia Tech and some other teams that are on the schedule. It's not as heinous, I would say, as in years prior, which is something to kind of put of note, which is something to kind of understand that the schedule is difficult. And we'll get into the nitty gritty of that here later in the show. But I just want to preface with saying, regardless of how you feel about, the 8 overtime loss to Georgia or the missed opportunities, against Syracuse last year, the week in, week out, and it's really easy to get caught in the sludge of what the college football season is. And I mean that in the sense of the college football season can really take a toll on you when you view it as life or death. And that's what, as fans, everyone's going to do. We're going to look at the lens of, week in, week out, how do you survive? That's one piece of the puzzle. But from a 30,000-foot view, this program is way better off than it was 2 to 3 years ago. This program has some stability. They've got a foundation that obviously a lot of fans coming into 2025 hope that they can launch into something that's next. So that's kind of the precursor, we'll say, of what the conversation tonight's going to be about. You can get your comments in. You can like the video. Make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel there as well. If you haven't already, head over to the Crowded Booth on YouTube. Maxwell says he is first. Nico second. Coffee Killer, evening all been waiting on this one. And Power Tech says good evening, go Jackets. Welcome in, everyone. So we talked about the foundation of where this team is, and it kind of leads into this discussion of the overarching theme of the title is Georgia Tech a dark horse college football playoff contender? And we're not going to beat around the bush. We're going to answer this right off the bat. In short, yes, this is a team that is a college football playoff contender. Now, Bryce, what do you mean by that? Because in terms of how you quantify what that is, well, you don't play in the SEC or the Big Ten. You play in a conference that got 2 bids last year. Now, it did take, I believe it was a 1-loss regular season from SMU and losing in the, I guess that's right, losing in the conference title game. You had 2 losses for SMU to reach it, and the automatic bid out of the ACC and Clemson last year. So that was the formula for how the ACC got 2 teams in. And so the question really becomes, in today's day and age of the playoff, is can you just be one of the top 2 ACC teams standing? And I think when you look at this conference top to bottom, there's been a lot of shuffling. There's perceived strength somewhere. And I'll talk to you a little bit about this, but it doesn't have to be what it was in the 14 playoff for the BCS. You don't have to, sit here and finagle and wonder, can you get a win here? Can you steal a win there? And can you just pray that you only have 1 loss at the end of the season? No, I would push back against that narrative because, one, college football has changed. And now with the playoff expanded, it's can you really be a top 2 team in the ACC? Because if you're sitting in the top 2 and if you make it to Charlotte, you have a legitimate shot to be playing meaningful football in middle to late December. And that's the goal now, right? I mean, you want to be playing meaningful football in the month of December, which means a conference title game, typically that first weekend, while also kind of parlaying that into at least a first round playoff opportunity there. So by those margins, not talking about, we haven't gotten anything into the roster yet. We haven't talked anything about the coaching, the schedule. By the broad stroke of the paintbrush, when you talk about the 30,000-foot view of where this team is entering 2025, are they a college football playoff contender? And I put dark horse in the title. It doesn't have to be a popular choice, but do they have an opportunity to make some noise? Yes. I think that they have an opportunity to make a noise as just as someone is like Louisville does, just as someone like an SMU does this year. You take a look across the ACC there as well. I mean, outside of Clemson, who I've gone on record and said this multiple times, I think Clemson has the most talented team since their run with Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson. Like those years when they were at the top of the sport or near the top of the sport each and every single year, the talent they have this year is great. But the good thing is, that's not the difference for Georgia Tech in years past and for a host of ACC teams is it's not a one bid league, and you saw that last year. So that's important to note and to understand. SMU getting in, by the way, pony up as always. SMU getting in after losing the conference title game not only helped the anti-SEC argument or agenda that's out there for a lot of people, but it also helped a program like Georgia Tech to know, and look, inside the building, this is why we're doing this. Inside the building, they're not preaching this. You never want to say how many games can we lose and still get in. But just in straight up terms of what you have, on that roster, now that it's not perfection that's going to get you in. It's not one mishap. Maybe you can afford 2 if it's the right 2 mishaps. So once again, that's not the message being preached by the coaching staff and whatever. But in the realm of what we're talking about, this team is a playoff contender because if they can get to Charlotte, you've got a good shot. And it's really nothing more than that. There's no reason to dive, so far into this thing to where you're sitting there and you're telling yourself, well, this has to happen. You're checking it off. This has to happen. No, it's really comes down to the fact there's a strong belief that this team could be in Charlotte. And if things break right, we'll talk about here in just a second of why I think they could make it to Charlotte. But if things break right, you have the pieces to get there. And so we'll mention that in a second. But it's not this far-fetched concept that this team could be playing in Charlotte. It's not a far-fetched concept that this team could be playing in December. You have some pretty pivotal things that are in your favor compared to the rest of the league that favor you. So that being said, let's kind of dive into the first thing. Coffee Killer says, my man, speak the truth. Anthony Perez says, let's go. Nico says, Bruce thinks we win in the Natty, we in. And then Matt says, make sure you hit that like button. Yes, but please do. Before we get started, I want to tell you, though, Section 103, make sure you're checking out the best Georgia Tech gear on the market. We're partnering with them for the 2025 season. 3 straight years we have partnered with them. They do a fantastic job. Best Georgia Tech gear on the market, from hats, apparel, jacket, anything you want, jackets, T-shirts, sweatshirts, anything you want. Make sure you use code The Crowded Booth for 15% off your first order there today. Okay, so the 3 pillars for me that determine whether or not you're a college football playoff contender, it kind of comes down to this. And here's the big one, right? Here is the massive one that I guess in the forefront of what we're talking about. It comes down to roster construction, which is a very fluid topic in today's day and age of college football. You have to have the right pieces, part of your puzzle, to be able to capitalize on an opportunity. And let's just call it what it is for Georgia Tech this year. This is an opportunity where you have, outside of, I'll give 2 guys, and maybe that's generous, and people can fact check me here, but just the 2 guys that kind of come to mind for me off of a core group that you could have had, you're not going to have this year: Eric Singleton Jr. and Romello Height. Those 2 guys would have helped. It's not a conversation. It's not up for debate. Those 2 guys would have obviously helped your case. Outside of that, the most important position on the football field in terms of leadership and commanding what you want to do at the quarterback position, outside of Cade Klubnik, who I think is the best quarterback in the ACC, you have an argument for the best quarterback, one, but also you have an argument for one of the more talented and more proven returning quarterbacks in college football. So check mark there. And Haynes King, you have a guy where, as long as number 10 is in the game for you, you're going to have a legitimate shot to win a football game. And that's not, once again, it's not up for debate. When he's playing, even when he hasn't played 110% healthy, you've got an opportunity to go win a game. So when you have a guy like that, and I mean, I think you can make a case that number 10 for Tech and Haynes King arguably might be the most important person to the success of his team. There might not be another one. He's that important to Georgia Tech. We saw last year when he didn't play what happened. So that being said, check mark. You have one of the biggest question marks in college football of who's going to be taking snaps and directing this offense and steering the controls. Who's that going to be? Georgia Tech's not even thinking about that. Now, look, we're going to dive into some positional previews kind of as we ramp up to the summer, up till ACC Media Days. But behind him, you have a guy who there's a wide spectrum of thoughts on Aaron Philo, right? From a roster construction standpoint, you couldn't be in a better spot, in my opinion, because you have a guy who has upside. He's flashed a little bit. He's got upside. That's all I'm going to say about him. I've seen everything from the best arm in the country to, the rumor, not the rumors, but the rumblings from some of the fans that maybe he should get more of a look at starter. That's neither here nor there for me. I'm not engaging in, I think it's best not to get into those type of conversations. What I will say is that you have an advantageous quarterback situation in what the room that has not been this talented in some while. You have Haynes King, a proven Power 4 player. Is he a great college quarterback? In my opinion, he's not. He's really, really good. Is that a knock? No, I just think that the term elite, great, and good is completely all over the place. I think he's a really good college quarterback, and I think he can help you do some things. Now, talk about Aaron Philo. You've got upside there. When you kind of look at what your roster needs, right, you start to look at some key positions, and you say, you know what? You feel good about it. Jamal Haynes is, I think it's safe to say, top 10 returning running back in the country. So if you've got a top, and the list have kind of varied everywhere, but I feel comfortable saying this, and I'm going to give leeway on it. Top 20 returning quarterback, top 15 returning quarterback, and a top 10 returning running back. You like the nucleus of your offense. You like what you have in terms of what can make your offense go. What is the straw that stirs the drink? Do you have that, and does it feel like it's proven? Well, once again, if you're going down the checklist of what it means to be a college football playoff contender, check. You have that. Now, obviously, a question we'll get into more with the position is you have to have somebody step up at running back too. We'll see who that's going to be. That's a I don't even want to label it as a question mark. That's one of the must-haves if you're going to really consider yourself among those types of players or among in terms of the playoff. So you have that. At wide receiver, this is where for me you start to get into some more of the question marks because in terms of roster construction, last year, once again, this isn't I'm just going to say this by the way. This isn't even my personal opinion. This is a couple of people's observations or statements. People who coached against Georgia Tech last year, people who coached for Georgia Tech last year, and people who have helped recruit players to both Georgia Tech and recruited against Georgia Tech in the past 365 days. When these people look at and look at this and they, scout this team, one thing from a roster construction standpoint that you have to wonder is with Eric Singleton, you had elite spacing. Do you get that out of the guys they brought in? I'm excited about Eric Rivers. I think you should be excited about Eric Rivers. I'm just going to tell you that week 1, when they go on the road to Boulder, there's going to be a feeling out period for Colorado's defense in terms of we don't really know what to expect because we don't know what the spacing is going to be. So I think it's just something that you have to have literal actual game time to kind of build what they want. So the spacing thing for me, when you look at the roster construction, is you have guys that can do it. Like another guy that I really like, Isaiah Canyon. I think it's the physical presence that Georgia Tech has sorely missed in terms of a wide receiving option on the outside. If you can utilize him, if he really does step up, man, that just elevates the ceiling of what this team can do in 2025. So all that to say is it's not that it can't happen. It's just we don't know. You can take what you saw at FIU. You can take what you obviously saw out of Isaiah Canyon in spurts last year and in the spring game and stuff like that. But when push comes to shove, is you got to see it happen for 12 weeks in the fall. And until that happens, there's no accurate depiction of what we're going to see. Now, obviously, having Malik Rutherford helps. Malik Rutherford was also aided by the fact that you had a pretty good spacing in terms of, even Jackson Halls to a certain extent. I know he wasn't as dynamic in the passing game, but just his presence, the actual presence of Eric Singleton Jr. helped this team. That is a baseline conversation. It is not up for debate. If there's any rebuttal against it, it's not even in the realm of like correct. There's just nothing there. You can argue semantics about what he was. Was it productive enough? Was it worth the money? We are so far past that conversation. I don't even think it's needed. What I'm telling you is that you could miss the spacing. That's a question. The running back 2 conversation, who steps up and is legitimately, you have 2 backs because you have to have that. And then the second part is the spacing offensively. That's the big thing. Staying with the theme of roster construction, I'm going to go to point 3 on the offense. It's the offensive line. I really encourage you. We did a fantastic interview with William Reed, the new transfer. That's going to be dropping on Friday at around noon Eastern. Make sure you get in on that content because it's one of the better interviews we've done because it dives a little bit more into the mentality of Jeep Wade and Brent Key and why it works. So that to me, I'm not going to spoil too much of it. It was a great interview with William Reed. I appreciate him hopping on the show and talking with us. But that being said, you have Corey Robinson is gone. That is we have not talked about that, but obviously that's one of those things where with Robinson out, you don't know if the production's going to be the exact same. You'd like to think it has. Once again, across the board for every program, Georgia Tech included, progress is not always linear. So it's one of the things that what you hope to see happen is Ethan McKinney is good to go and you don't worry about it at left tackle. Okay, you continue to slide inside. Weston Franklin not being your center, it would shock me. I will say this. It would shock me, with all due respect to whoever lines up at center this year, if there's not a tad bit of a drop-off. Why, Bryce? Because you hate the team? No. Because when you had a guy who played as much football and had as much experience as Weston Franklin, there's just natural, gradual growing pains that come in with a guy really it being his role and his job full-time. There's just natural growing pains that come with that. So does that mean it's going to be bad? No, it doesn't mean bad. It's just, it could be a little bit of a drop off. Like we just don't necessarily know that it's just going to be the exact same. And then obviously right tackle, which, Jacoby Jones no longer with the program, deciding to go back to the junior college ranks after spring ball. You've got some options there. We've talked about, Malachi Carney a little bit. We've obviously talked with William Reed. You have upside there. You've got some veteran players. All things considered here, it's a offensive line that was really good last year. I mean, I've said this in past sets, they were really, really good. They don't really throw the ball a ton to, I think, offset or not offset, but to really take advantage of it. But I think what they do, and we can all agree here, is that they protected Haynes King to a certain extent, and it made allowed him to be a playmaker. Is that going to just carry over because Jeep Wade's a good coach and because Brent Key is an offensive line coach at heart? We'd like to think so, but it's once again you replacing at least 3 guys on the offensive line who had played a lot of football. Weston Franklin and Jordan Williams are going to be missed. Acting like it's just going to be the same is almost just kind of like a shot saying, well, it's not not a shot. And let me say that better. It's not a shot to the guys that left, but it's maybe not cutting them and giving them enough credit for what they were able to do. Maybe that's the best way to put it, because you do have talent at the offensive line position, but it's just unproven. You don't necessarily know that in the course of a full game, those guys are going to be just as good as what you had last year. So offensively, from a roster construction standpoint, you exactly have what you want. You've got the quarterback, you've got the running back. The big check mark spots you've got. Now defensively, let's talk a little bit about that real quick. Defensively on this side of the football, I will tell you this, and I'm going to preview it in the position previews. The position group I am most excited about coming out of spring ball. Like, this has the chance to be one of the best linebacker rooms that we have seen at Georgia Tech in 15 to 20 years. That group can really, really be good. Like, really, really good. The development of Taj Butler, the development of you obviously going to get EJ Lightsey back in the fold. Playing Kyle Eford in a spot that's more advantageous to him. Like, the linebacker room can be very, 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 very good. Like, when I tell you, if there's one position group on the defensive side of the football that I think could have an all ACC first team selection, it is the linebacker room. Like, I think that, and DB, you could have Clayton Powell plays well enough. Yeah, he's going to get there. But that linebacker room has athleticism and speed that it has not had in a long time. So, in terms of that, we like how it projects. What does that linebacker room look like? Obviously, with your DC leaving last year, there as well, what do you have there in terms of, the players, how they developed? Defensive back room, they've stacked this so much, and you have Blake Gideon, who I think is, for me, is a home run hire in terms of on paper what you want out of him. We'll obviously see what he looks like in that first game against Colorado, but you feel good about with the amount of defensive backfield guys they have between, Corey Peoples, between Kobe Jones, between Blake Gideon. Like, there's enough brain power there and smart, even young coaches there to where you feel good about where you're sitting in that room. Who's going to start? Well, we can play the depth chart game all over. Like, it can anywhere you want to go with it, you can go. The big thing is that you've got proven guys, you've got some young guys, and I think in the portal you were able to bridge the gap between not having to force some of those young guys to necessarily play right away. So from a roster construction standpoint, I feel like you have enough depth to where, knock on wood, someone of the starters gets injured, you're not throwing in a true freshman where maybe you had to do that 2 years ago. You don't have to do that. You're building up the depth of the secondary to withstand the grueling season that it is over the 12-game season. So defensive back room, I think you have a pretty good floor there. I'll say that. Defensive line's obviously where everyone's going to kind of point their finger and say, okay, this could make or break the entire defense. And that's a fair assumption. Jordan Vandenberg, monster, was really good for you last year. If he elevates even further and becomes a massive disruptor in the middle, that's huge. Kilo Stone, getting him back, raises the floor of this group. And then obviously outside of that, you start to kind of wonder who's going to step up. Pass rush for me is something that is going to be interesting because, look, you lose regardless of the actual production, okay? Because this is what I encourage people to do, and it doesn't happen very often, but I encourage people to do it, is don't just look at a box score. Don't just look at a PFF grade. reach out to people who know, and maybe educate yourself too in this as well when you're watching these games. Romello Height didn't have crazy numbers, but once again, like we talked about with Eric Singleton, it's his presence and what teams know that he is capable of. And if you just that worries people. And if a guy like Romello Height, if you just get home every so often, whether it's an actual sack or whether it's a pressure or whether it's whatever it might be, that's in the mind of the left or right tackle. That's in the mind of the quarterback. It doesn't have to be some crazy, look, I mean, we've seen some elite pass rushers in college football over the past 5 to 10 years. It does not have to be this crazy double-digit sack guy. It's the presence of someone who's capable of doing that. Georgia Tech has not had that. I mean, Keon White obviously was a really good player, but in terms of a guy that you brought in, 10, 12 years at this point. So, when we talk about the make or break mentality, the boom or bust potential, for me, it's on the defensive line because, and I see, Nico and Anthony down here talking about Manley. Look, I've talked to people at Mercer about this. I've talked to people at Georgia Tech about this too. And there's an excitement level for him. If Braden Manley translates, if that translates, you've got a bona fide all ACC type of pass rusher. That to me is really, it's cut and dry. You've got some other options that you can utilize. They got some young guys that they like. That's great. Manley, to me, is going to have a chip on his shoulder. Obviously, being an FCS guy, making the jump up to the ACC is a big test. There's a lot of people, including myself, wondering, does that just translate? What is the growth period there? Is there a growing period there too? So, all things considered, is Braden Manley could give you boom or bust potential. If he pans out and he translates, then you are cooking. You have a legitimate threat on the outside that strikes fear into the quarterback. If not, well, it taxes you on the back end of the defense. And so that's obviously the concern. Is the pass rush going to be better? So all things considered, as we hit nearly the 30-minute mark here, appreciate you watching. Make sure you like the video. And if you're not already, look, a lot of you aren't. So hit the subscribe button right down below, completely free for you to do. Make sure you get in and do that. So from a roster construction standpoint, you can see where we're sitting here throughout that 20-minute conversation. And it's like, okay, yeah, you need some questions answered. You need some guys to step up, but everyone else in the country needs that. Here's the thing. You can't gauge yourself against the rest of the country because you're competing against the rest of the ACC, like we talked about. So in regards to the rest of the conference, I think it's very much doable to what you could do. It's very much doable to get to Charlotte if things break right and things trend in your direction. So I don't necessarily think it's a question of the roster construction because it's there. The skeleton of what you need to be a playoff team exists on Georgia Tech's roster. Like, it's there. Does that mean it'll happen? No. Things have to go your way. Guys have got to develop. Internal development has to be really good. But it's there. There's really no denying that they have the ability to go to Charlotte and make some noise. All right, let's take a look at the second point here. Because the second point is very, I think it's such a different topic for us than we typically talk about on this show. Navigating the schedule. So I went back and looked, like, your first 3 games, the first 3 weeks of the season will obviously kind of tell you a lot. I've maintained this. Getting into the first 4 games, the first 4 bye weeks, like the first 4 until the bye week, there on October the 4th. That's going to tell you a ton about being able to navigate the schedule, being able to, like we said earlier, you're not trying to pick which games you can lose. One, it's really hard to go undefeated, regardless of who you are, because the landscape of college football has changed so much. But if you can understand that if you pick and choose correctly where you are on this schedule to navigate it the right way, 1, recency bias matters, and 2, how you win and how you lose matters. It's not just straight W's and L's. It's how you do that and what fashion. When you look at this schedule, obviously I would say, if you want to be a playoff team, let's just preface with this, and we'll obviously get more and more into these contests and these games as the summer goes along. We get into fall camp, but if you want to be a playoff team, if you really truly think that you're a playoff caliber team, then you should go on the road and beat Colorado. Because look, it's been humorous for me to see fan pages and fans go back and forth, whatever team it is. But there's a lot of like, well, they lost this and this, and they can't do this and they can't do that. Well, one, you're speaking on something definitively that there's no way you could know that unless you were on staff and inside that building. There's just no way you can know that. Even if you're gathering it from another news source, it's one person's opinion. So you don't know that. But if Colorado is as decimated as I'm led to believe, and obviously, from a lot of Georgia Tech fans, then if they're as bad as Georgia Tech fans want to make them out to be, then it shouldn't be a challenge. I'll tell you one thing. I'll raise my hand. I don't believe that. I don't. It would shock me to see Colorado just be god awful this year at football. I don't see a scenario where that happens. And I'm talking about god awful like 3-9 or worse. Like that's what god awful is. So if you're a playoff team, you go there and take care of business. Because I'm gonna tell you this: the game got put prime time 8:00. Why is it? Okay. Well, it is because everything it's so Colorado's so marketable with Deion Sanders that you're going to get the primetime slot. Here's an opportunity for you to say, hey, I know we're perceived to be the little brother here. We're perceived to be the team that, we may be cool, but we're not. There's no sex appeal to Georgia Tech football. But hey, we're a pretty good team. We're taking care of business. Kind of like Indiana did at times last year. It wasn't sexy, but they just kept winning. That's kind of the mentality Georgia Tech needs to take with this game. A lot of hoopla, a lot of drama, a lot of the fanfare is going to be surrounding the team out there in Boulder. So go there, take care of business on national television, and move on to the next week. That, to me, when you talk about navigating the schedule, is there. Obviously, look, I mean, you got to win the games. I'm not calling them gimme games, but you got to win your bye games. You can't lose to Gardner-Webb. You cannot lose to Temple. And then, obviously, I guess that is it, right? Yeah. So you have Temple, Gardner-Webb. You can't lose those games. You kind of, to be a playoff team, you have to beat the teams that are perceived to be in and around, where you are. And what I mean by that is, you have like Virginia Tech, Duke, Syracuse. I mean, you really just kind of roll from, I'm going to go back through this. You roll from October the 11th to it's November 22nd. You got a bye week in there in between NC State and Boston College. But that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 games. There's 6 games on this schedule to where you're kind of sitting there and you're going, okay, like on paper, a lot of people kind of feel like from a national perspective that all these teams in the ACC are kind of jumbled together. Well, if you're going to be a playoff team, you have to set yourself apart from those. The separation factor from the jumbled mess that is the middle tier of the ACC, a playoff team is going to emerge from that. So can you do that? Well, it means that you've got to do really good. I mean, you can only lose maybe one of those games. You have to do that. So that's including a home game against Virginia Tech, on the road against Duke, home against Syracuse, at NC State, and at Boston College there in November. Wake Forest, to me, I don't think anybody knows what Wake Forest is going to be, so I kind of put them in the games that you should just take care of business. So you include Wake Forest along with Temple, along with Gardner-Webb there as well. So that is, let's do the quick math. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we go 7. Yeah, so we've talked about 10 games. I mentioned playoff team, you go take care of the road against a team that you feel like you're better than in Colorado. We can talk about social media back and forth between fan publications, or we can go on the field and you can go win a game, and that's what matters. So you go take care of business, Colorado. If you think you're that much better than them, then go prove that. I would say that's something that Georgia Tech has struggled with under Brent Key up to this point. And we'll get to the last part of that conversation here in just a bit. So that is there. Georgia and Clemson. Now, look, you're getting Clemson there on September the 13th. It is going to be week number 3. Obviously, you've got Georgia inside Mercedes-Benz on a Friday night on November 28th. I guess that game's still a Friday. I've seen where the Egg Bowl and all this kind of stuff, and Texas A&M is going to be on Friday night. I don't imagine that affects what Georgia Tech is going to be, but all things considered, if you're going to be a playoff team, we're about to get into some serious rocket science here. If you're going to be a playoff team, then you win against playoff caliber teams. It's riveting stuff, isn't it? Georgia and Clemson. I have said, like I've said earlier in the show, and I've said multiple times on our college football show, I think Clemson has some supreme talent. I'm interested to obviously see that week 1 matchup against LSU at home for them, what it looks like. I think from a defensive standpoint, they've got some really, really good impact players, and the supporting cast is really good too. Georgia, I mean, look, regardless of what you think is Gunnar Stockton as a quarterback, if I can at least be a point guard, they feel better about their wide receiver room, their run game, their offensive line should bounce back, one would think. So if that happens, it's still going to be a tough opponent. Obviously, very physical. We'll see what happens inside Mercedes-Benz. If you are going to be a playoff contender, you got to win one of those. You have to at least win one of those. I don't think that you can get to a college football playoff by going 0-2 in those games. Going 10-2, I mean, just play the hypothetical game. You go 10-2 this season with losses to Clemson and Georgia. Where's your marquee win? Like just truthfully, Virginia Tech, Duke, you don't have it. So 10-2 and 1 loss in the conference would get you into the ACC title game. I think you'd have to win that. 3-loss ACC runner-up without a marquee win is going to be hard to sell. So if you're a playoff contender, you need to win one of the two, split at the very minimum, Georgia and Clemson. Now, look, we're talking about a team that, like I've said earlier, when it comes to roster construction, if number 10 is under center, you've always got a chance. So I'm not going to count them out. So that's kind of the navigating the schedule. It's obviously an easier one in terms of what we're thinking it could be. I mean, look, you get to November and let's just say the Duke turns out to be, Darian Menz is the real deal. And they got a good defense and Menz is better what they had and they're really good. Who knows? NC State makes some kind of weird jump because the ACC is weird and Dave Doran's capable of doing that with his team. That could also happen. But just in terms of that schedule, you win the 3 games I think you should definitely win. You go on the road and beat Colorado. Maybe you can afford to drop one of the middle-tier ACC games, but you have to split. Essentially, you got to split Georgia Clemson. And if you lose one of the games to the Duke, Virginia Tech, and stuff like that in the world, you definitely have to do that. So, Scott says, we appreciate you tuning in, Scott. Do you think this is shaping up to be a schedule that if it doesn't happen this year, probably won't happen for a while with how hard the schedules have been in the past? I think that, Scott, I think it's an interesting question. Rosters change so much year to year that it's really hard to gauge. But like you've said, I mean, look, you got Tennessee and Georgia next year. Those teams, look, I mean, people love to make fun of the elite teams when they don't win the national title, which I think is one of the dumbest things in the world because it's like you're sitting there at 6-6 pointing a finger at your rival and saying, ha ha, look at you, you didn't do this, where you didn't even come close to sniffing that opportunity. Georgia, Tennessee, Notre Dame, and they just kind of talk about some of the future Georgia Tech opponents, and obviously Chad Bishop, the AJC, kind of reporting and hinting at there's going to be some more of these marquee matchups released in the future. Those teams will always be in the hunt. And what I mean by that is the hunt for the playoff. Because, one, they've got the money to where they're not going to rest on their laurels and accept mediocrity. So they'll always, whether they ever get there or not, they're always going to be pushing for it. You cannot say the same for 80, 90 other programs when it comes to the nitty-gritty of who's actually really trying. So whether Tennessee, goes 8-4 this year or 7-5, I'm not going to say that schedule's not going to be tough next year. So to answer your question, though, apologies for getting off on that. is, do I think it's shaping up to be a year? I think this is very much a all in. You brought a lot of guys back. You were able to retain in the portal. You were able to fill the needs on paper with what you lost. You think it is, in my opinion, an all in type of year for 2025. It doesn't mean you don't have promise beyond this year. It just means that you have really ramped things up for what's on the roster here now. And if you don't get here then, it's not that it can't happen in 26 or 27. It just, I think if you're being real with yourself, it just doesn't necessarily seem as likely to be able to do that. This year, in my opinion, and maybe not in the other people, this year, in my opinion, really feels like a season to where if it's going to happen, in the next 3 years, this is your best bet. We can't foresee the future. I think there's a lot of promise for the roster and recruiting in the future, but in terms of what we know, we don't know what's going to happen in 26, 27. We don't know what's going to happen in 25, but you feel like, hey, from what I'm taking back and the data points I'm going off of, might have a pretty good shot. So that's a good question there, Scott. Okay, so real quick, Maxwell says GT admin hoping these marquee matchups make us more attractive for the next round of realignment. I don't think realignment's done. Could be. You got to position yourself for that. I think it's also understanding too, Maxwell, to a certain extent of like what we talked about. If you don't beat your rival who you're going to play every year and your bigger in conference, you can't just have 2 marquee games on the schedule like that. That's not going to cut it if you don't have an SEC logo on your jersey, even a Big Ten logo. So you have to do something to go out there and impress. That's why, from a brand value standpoint, the win over Colorado would mean a lot. But from an actual standpoint of what I think Colorado is going to be in 2025, I don't think anyone's going to look at that. Like, you can't be a 10-2 team and say our marquee wins Colorado and Colorado's 7-5 or 6-6. Like, and I mean, that's not feasible. Now, if Colorado's 9-3 and runners of the Big 12, you have a whole different type of conversation. So, yes, there you go. So, okay, the final portion of this show, and I think that this is where maybe most of the discourse between fans and the differing sides of, and I think we have to, it's part of evaluation and self-evaluation of where you're at. And so I kind of think it goes with this right here. The development of the coaches. What did I say to start off the show? Let's have a little, if you're watching this at home after the fact, you can't really do it live, but if you're watching after the fact or listening in your car, which I hope you are, make sure you check us out on all those podcast platforms and hit subscribe over on the YouTube channel. It helps us continue to grow, and like the video, like bare minimum stuff you got to do here to be able to help us out. We talked about the program was at a point to where you had at least stabilized yourself to where you can say, okay, we got ourselves on some solid footing, things you got to clean up, but we need to be able to take the next step. I think the growth of Brent Key is also very paramount to any type of success you're going to have in 2025. The continued evolution of Buster Faulkner as the offensive coordinator. Blake Gideon, it looks great on paper. Man, it's really cool to hear what high school coaches have to say about him. But when push comes to shove, can he put your guys in the right spots to be able to do some things? I think we all feel pretty good about Chris Winkie and the quarterbacks. Jess Simpson, lots been talked about him. A lot of people want to be excited about it. Well, here you go. Let's earn the money. Because, listen, this roster, the talent, you're not talented enough, in my opinion, to roll the ball out there and beat majority of the teams, right? But you are at a point in this program to where you should be able to, with your talent, your depth, and your veteran ability, and guys that just have been in those situations, you should be able to trust them to execute. So, look, from a game planning standpoint, from an in-game management standpoint when it comes to Brent Key, from a scheme standpoint, like we talked about earlier with the roster construction, you've got to figure out how to utilize Eric Rivers. He is talented. How can you get him the ball? How can you find that spacing? Is it just cookie cutter, like you're just going to copy and paste and let him play Eric Singleton's role? I mean, sometimes it can be that simple, but oftentimes it's not. So how do you get him to be what you think he is at the ACC level? Malik Rutherford, does he take a step back because you don't have the weapons around him that you had last year? What does that look like? Can you scheme things up offensive line that if there's an issue, like there's so many development points that Georgia Tech has to capitalize on that are not even just roster wise that you have to wonder. So the development of the coaching staff, it has to take a jump for you to be a playoff contender. It has to take a jump for you to be, you know, in the conversation to make it to the ACC title game in November. And I think if you're sitting and let's go back, I'll go back to the schedule here on my screen. If you roll in to the first game in November, you're going to Raleigh, okay? And you're in the hunt, you got to feel great about where you're at. It's how do you manage that down the stretch? And look, I know a lot of people. You go back to the bowl game. I talked with people about this from a professionalism standpoint and from certain elements of it. I don't love the way that I understand the game was getting called against you. I didn't love the way that was handled. You got to be able to, like, let's just call a spade a spade. Brent Key's a highly emotional guy. Part of the development of that is being able to keep that in check and stay focused in on the game and being able to stay focused into the game plan. So all things considered is the development of Brent Key as a head coach is paramount to any success you're going to have in 2025. The development and the next iteration of Buster Faulkner from being a pretty good play caller to a really good play caller, well, you got to see that happen. And you've got to see Blake Gideon kind of assume this defensive, coordinator position and run with it. And that's something that I think we all believe can happen, but will it happen? Well, that's something that you got to wonder. So like I've kind of said here, the development of coaches, we're not going to spend as much time on because obviously you kind of heard me say that. But to kind of wrap it up here, those are the three facets that I feel like you have to have, that you have to, has to be a part of your DNA for you to be playing meaningful football in December. So do they have the pieces? Yes. Is the potential there? Yes. The question is, and we're not going to have it answered, and it makes for great talking points all up until then and throughout the season is, will it happen? And that's ultimately what's going to make or break it. The recipe is there. The structure is there. But, it doesn't happen. Because sometimes, here's the thing. Sometimes you can have everything that you think is going to roll your way, and it just doesn't happen. And so it's not a given just because you have these things that everything's going to progress the way you want it to. That's hope, right? That's the hope aspect. But we'll see what happens. I think it could be a very exciting year. And I'll say this too. If you don't make the college football playoffs, it's an exciting year. I don't know what your personal floor is when you look at this schedule. I mean, I'll say this. I think that you have to win more than 7 games. I think you got to win more than 7 games. That to me is going to be the big. If you only win 7 games, then it's like, dang. I mean, it's not, look, you're a far cry from where you were, but it's also just a bad taste in your mouth. Just a bad taste in your mouth. So a lot of big aspects of that. Get a couple comments here as we wrap it out here. Philip Jack says you can't be a 2-loss team from the ACC and make it to the playoffs unless you win the ACC title. Completely agree. Hal says the 2025 team led by a 6-year, 4-star quarterback feels like Joe Ham in 1999. If GT gets to the ACC championship game, I think we are solid, he says. I'd be happy if we made the conference championship game. I've said this multiple times, like, understanding the landscape of college football, if this team goes 8-4 and wins a bowl game to go 9-4, like, it's progression. It just is. So I've never thought Georgia Tech was the team that could be a flash in the pan. They have not shown to be that, and it is what it is. Here's an interesting one. We'll end it with this. Key should be gone, Maxwell says, if we're stuck at 7 this year. I strongly, vehemently disagree with this. I think you got to know who you are. And while there's a lot of exciting things happening this year, firing a head coach in year 3 that is stabilized and had some progression, that would be ballsy. Like, if you're Jay Batt, you better. I would say this, like, in a hypothetical situation, they go 7-5, win a bowl game, go 8-5, whatever. I don't think that's a fireable record by any means, but I think it could put some pressure on you going to 26. But here's the thing. If you were Jay Bad in that situation and you fired Brent Key, one, it's going to be so hard to do that because the powers that be have a stranglehold on this program. But two, you better know who you're going to get. Like you better know. You absolutely better know. So it's one of those things. Malcolm says, honest take on Jamal Haynes this year. Malcolm, we're going to be doing a positional previews and kind of my thoughts on each group. I will tell you this, top 10 back in the country. You cannot run him into the ground. You cannot, like, you have to have running back too. So it'll be interesting. Andrew says you can't be the fan that wants to make emotional firings and also criticize Key for coaching out of emotion. Yeah, I don't think you could fire him for going. I mean, if he went 4-8, okay, but like, got to remember who you are. Got to remember what you're dealing with in terms of money, and also got to recognize where you're at. You have more support financially than you've had in 25, 30 years. Like, and I know it's a different era, but in terms of you just, went into the scope of all of those and comparatively, like, this is most bought in Georgia Tech has been into football in a long time, long time. So, yeah, it's one of those things. Pet Cat Meow says 8-4 feels like the floor for this team. I'll give you here in that, Meow. I'll say that if you go anything below 8 wins, it'd be disappointing. Like, it would be disappointing knowing what you had on this roster and the potential that it had. Yeah. So he also says we're deep at running back, so Haynes should be good. Should be. You're right. It should be. So I think I think it could be an interesting situation. Hey, listen, we appreciate you tuning in. Before we get you out of here, there's a link down in the description below. It's look, we were able to do some great things last football season. We did the Fifth Street Bridge tailgate for the Georgia Tech Georgia State game. Had a great time meeting a lot of you in person, doing a live show. We loved it. We were able to, obviously, myself and the whole crew, go out to SMU and film a fantastic, with unfiltered access out there in Dallas, as we continue to grow this brand. And look, obviously, a lot of you have tuned into the show because you're a Georgia Tech fan, but I really do encourage you, come talk some college football with the rest of us. We are going to be hitting a lot of ACC content, hopefully, obviously, getting up to Charlotte for ACC Media Days, getting some interviews with not only just Brent Key and whoever goes, but ACC coaches around the conference as well as some SEC stuff too. So, look, we have a lot of fun with this, but we want to continue pushing forward into getting better content for you all. So, couple things. Whatever level of support that you feel like you want to be able to make to that, you can click that link down there in the description on YouTube. Donate whatever you would like to the channel. It all goes 110% back into the channel to be able to create content for you. So that's what we do with that money. The second part of it is, it's one of those things to where if you don't feel like you can donate monetarily or anything like that, share this channel, like the videos, subscribe to the channel. Even a like helps us in that YouTube algorithm, and we have a lot of fun with it. So, look, I'm really pumped to get back on the saddle in terms of our live show content, getting some really good guests on here nationally to talk some college football with us. And like I teased earlier in the show, this is obviously airing on a Thursday night. Tomorrow, Friday around noon, you're going to have that interview in your inbox. You can go to thecrowdedbooth.com, sign up for completely free, and the shows come right into your inbox, whether it's on YouTube or on that podcast platform, so that you know whenever we post that latest content, and set up notifications too. Typically, schedule withstanding, we're live every single Monday and Wednesday night around 7:30 Central, 8:30 Eastern, talking college football. The tech show kind of varies. I am thinking about tweaking some things and doing a morning or maybe a midday show as well. So lots of great ideas we've got here coming up in the next couple of weeks, including a top 25 rankings, which I will tell you, Georgia Tech is in my preseason top 25. My name is Bryce Kuhn. We appreciate you so much for tuning in. Thanks for all of our loyal listeners and followers, and we will catch you next time here on Swarm Talk, brought to you by the Crowded Booth.
Pile in here and make yourself feel at home. The Crowded Booth is coming on. The Crowded Booth with